I'll try to get some
Recording audio. So we're ready? Just because that might film the back of your head. So if people zoom on us. You want me to not be here?
Hola, hola. Okay. Hola, buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros aquí en el día de hoy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and also thank you for arriving quite early, because we actually had a little bit of a slight change on the timing of the event, and it was delayed by 30 minutes. So that gave time for all of you to actually arrive on time and to be part of this, what I think is a really exciting event. My name is Devanix Batista. I'm the Deputy Director of the UN Global Fund for Coral Reefs. And today we're going to be talking about blended finance innovation for reef conservation in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is very special for me as a Latin American and Caribbean person, and working with our three great partners from the Nature Conservancy, Fundación, and Marfan, who are actually the three blended finance programs that the GFCR is financing in the region, and for the betterment and the support of coral reef conservation in the wider Caribbean. So today, our colleagues are actually going to be sharing with us their experience on developing blended finance programs, some of the lessons learned, and how is it that their work is going. Before I actually get to talking a little bit about what is the GFCR and what is our blended finance approach, I'm actually going to introduce our panelists. This is very quickly a quick run of our agenda. So we're going to be introducing them now. I'm going to talk about the GFCR in general, and then Natalia is going to speak to us about the Fiwi Reef program here in Colombia, in the islands of San Andres and Providencia. Lizzie McLeod, who is the Global Ocean Director for TNC, will talk to us about the Nature Conservancy's Bahama Reef program. And I should have mentioned that Natalia is the Executive Director of Fundación. And then Amy from Marfan, which is the Mesoamerican Reef Fund, is going to talk to us about the Mar Plus Invest, for which she is the program coordinator. And in fact, Marfan, the Mar Plus Invest was actually one of our first regional programs. So I think it's going to be interesting, Amy, to also look at that sub-regional aspect as we carry on our conversation today. So, the GFCR, I think some of you are already familiar with who we are and what is our model. The GFCR is a global coalition dedicated to safeguarding the most resilient reefs around the world, the communities that depend on them, and the economies that these ecosystems underpin. We do this by unlocking public and private sector financing to develop what we call reef-positive businesses. So basically, businesses that are responsible with the reefs and enhance, again, the ecosystem, and also financial mechanisms that help augment the amount of resources available for marine and coral reef conservation. I think everybody in this room probably knows that SDG 14 is the most underfunded SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, in the UN agenda, And the GFCR is actually the only UN fund fully dedicated to SDG 14. So while that brings recognition to the value of the work that we are doing, I think it's also important to be humble and recognize that we are literally a drop in the water. There is a lot more that is required to bring financing for conservation, and we are hoping that through our demonstration model of blended finance, we can contribute to achieving Target 19, closing that finance gap, and actually supporting this agenda. I don't know how many of you have seen the studies already, but there was a study that indicates that every year we would need $175 billion to finance ocean conservation. So we hope that through our experience and through our demonstration, other models can be scaled up and help close this gap. In general, the GFCR implements its work through 5 pathways to scale. The first one, as I mentioned before, is related to the creation of new financial mechanisms to augment the financial resources available for marine and coral reef conservation. Second, we're dedicating ourselves to building the pipeline of reef-positive businesses. And there is a direct link, actually, between the financial mechanisms and instruments that we're creating under Pathway 1, and then how these new instruments and financial resources can nourish those reef-positive businesses that then can hopefully scale up. But one of the key lessons learned that we have had in the GFCR already is that without the right enabling environment, without the right policies and regulations in place, we can demonstrate, but we won't be able to replicate, and therefore we won't be able to transform. And that's why the GFCR, and now in our, I would say, almost second phase, we're putting a lot more energy on how is it that we work on that policy and regulatory environment. And some of the work that some of our partners here are doing is actually already directed to that. So I would entice you, Natalia, Amy, and Lizzie, to talk about that if you can during your presentation. This is the heart of the GFCR, those 3 pathways, the enabling conditions, the financial instruments and resources, and then those 2 as enabling factors to develop the reef-positive businesses. But we all recognize in this room, probably, and definitely in the GFCR, that this is still a very new space, blended finance for the ocean. We're all learning together. We're also going to get into some of those learnings from our panelists today. And that's why our 4th pathway is dedicated to creating a virtuous circle of knowledge and impact learning. So we are in the process of developing what we call Reef Plus, which is a platform that brings together our partners that we are financing, but also other partners to jointly learn about blended finance in the ocean and avoid making other mistakes in the future. And when we bring that knowledge aspect, is that we actually have the power to come to places like this in Cali for the COP16 and be able to then influence and show the negotiators what are the things and the models that are working, so that those can be used as examples that can guide the resource mobilization negotiations that are actually taking place here. And that's our 5th pathway. How is it that we contribute then to the global policy shift for greater and better finance for the ocean? Our general blended finance strategy basically incorporates the following. We in the UN hold what we call the UN Grant Fund of the GFCR, and we use these resources and deploy them as technical assistance or concessional finance in the form of guarantees or concessional loans, so that we can use these instruments to de-risk and attract private sector investors and crowd them in. And that's why it's blended, because we use grant resources to do the de-risking, and then the private sector investors come in. In our case, in the GFCR, we also have a partner called Pegasus Capital Advisors. They manage the GFCR Equity Fund. That's one of the tools that we have to attract private sector investment, but we are also working with other partners, and actually the 3 panelists here are working with other partners to also attract other actors in the private arena to support these reef-positive and ocean-positive businesses. What are we aiming to do in terms of impact sectors? What are the kinds of businesses that we are supporting? So we have 3 impact sectors that we focus on. First, sustainable ocean production. These are all the businesses that we're supporting related to sustainable fisheries, mariculture, aquaculture, then sustainable coastal development. These are all the businesses that we're supporting around ecotourism, for example, and also coastal infrastructure as well. National coastal infrastructure, or infrastructure that helps to ensure that nature continues to thrive. And then last but not least is the work around the circular economy and waste reduction, including both plastic management and wastewater management. So those are the three sectors in which we focus. So of course, as you would probably have noticed, all of this is not just about coral reefs. We're actually acting within the wider space of a sustainable blue economy for ocean conservation. But everything that we do has to link back again to the health of the reef, the health of the people, and the resilience of the people that depend on the reefs, and the economies that the reefs support. So with that introduction, we have already done this part with our panelists. So you can read very quickly the great expertise that they have. But we can now move to first hearing from each one of them about what is it that their programs are trying to accomplish. So Lizzie, Natalia, Amy, the first question is around that. How is your program designed? Why do you choose the reefs where you're working? Why those reefs are important? And what are the main components of each of your programs? Lizzie.
Great, thank you so much, Eva. Thank you all for being here today. So for folks who may not know, the Nature Conservancy is one of the largest environmental organizations working on oceans, also lands and waters, but our work is focused on the oceans here today. And we've been leading conservation in the oceans for over 50 years. And we have about 6,000 staff working in 81 countries. And we're really honored and grateful to be a part of the GFCR partnership. And as Yaba mentioned, we have a project in Bahamas, but also Micronesia and Indonesia. The Bahamas hold one of the world's largest contiguous reefs, the Andros Barrier Reef, but they also hold a third of the reefs in the Caribbean. So really vitally important for coral reefs in the Caribbean. And TNC's been working in the Bahamas for a little over 20 years now. And the focus of our work more broadly has been on sustainable fisheries, marine protected areas with a focus on protecting critical habitats like coral reefs, supporting community livelihoods, and also supporting effective management and helping support nature-based solutions, so helping communities adapt to climate change. The Bahama Reefs program is a blended finance program. You heard a bit about that from Yaba, but it's really focused on developing, incubating, and growing reef-positive businesses, both to support the resilience of reefs, but also vitally reef-dependent communities. And we have 4 focal areas in Andros, Grand Bahama, Abaco, and Exuma. And we have 3, actually before I go to the outcomes, we've had a number of partnerships with some scientific partners and community members to identify climate resilient reefs. So this is a combination of physical oceanography data with stakeholder engagement with communities that are helping to identify reefs that they've observed have survived bleaching events, and combining the ecological data sets with that local knowledge to actually inform an identification of a network of resilient reefs that form the basis of our portfolio here. Next slide, please. And so we have 3 outcomes that the project is focused on. The first is really on improving the management effectiveness of marine protected areas, but also coral reefs. 2 is on strengthening the livelihoods of reef-dependent communities. And the third pillar is focused on building resilience through restoration. And then within those pillars, there's a number of key projects that we focus on in terms of identifying climate refugia and making sure that they are managed effectively and protected, making sure we're reducing the threats that are facing reefs, and supporting policies. Yaba talked about, making sure that you have the right enabling environment. So TNC's been working with the government, will be helping to develop a national coral conservation and restoration plan, but also specific guidance and regulations around coral reef restoration, because that's obviously vital to scaling in the region. New financial mechanisms that support sustainable financing, and through that we're looking at things like mangrove and reef insurance, the feasibility of those, also blue carbon and resilience credits, And then supporting the Blue Economy Accelerator, and that's really to help catalyze reef positive businesses.
Thank you, Lizzie. So Fondo Acción is a conservation trust fund, a Colombian NGO. We have two missions. We work with conservation of biodiversity and the well-being of children, which is an interesting combination in itself. Our marine portfolio started in 2009 with the first endowment to support the management plan of Malpelo Island, which is an oceanic island of the Pacific coast of Colombia. And we started looking at the Caribbean probably a little bit before 2020, but then a lot of what happened during Iota, I think, the hurricane that devastated the island in 2020, had a lot to do with our decision to move rapidly into action in the archipelago. So San Andrés, Providencia, and Santa Catalina archipelago is the biggest archipelago of Colombia in the Caribbean. And Colombia is the western tip of South America, and it includes this archipelago, most of Colombia's coral reefs. They have been studied quite a bit, and we now know that they are biodiversity reservoirs and climate change refugia, have been performing fairly well with recent heat waves and other phenomena associated with climate change, but we did get, after many years, 2 or 3 storms, strong storms, and Iota, and the following one that I'm forgetting the name, were pretty devastating. It has been reported that it holds 59 coral reef species. The numbers you see there speak for themselves. But what is not necessarily known is that it's the home of the Raizal community. They have this ethnic identification. They are more Creole rather than they are Creole, not Latinos like me. It's a combination, as you know, in the Caribbean of the blending of Afro ethnicities, French and English, and they have very strong cultural identities, and they're very strong about defending the way of life. And it was important to us to address that before any intervention. Luckily, we had the possibility of starting our conversations fairly early in the process of designing the project in order to invite them to the design phase and have their full participation, as well as the local environmental authorities. And on top of all that, we have the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve at Seaflower. What we're doing with with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs basically is to increase the financial sustainability of marine protected areas, strengthen the entrepreneurial capacity of communities through long-term financial mechanisms to restore reef health and their ability to provide ecosystem services, increase climate resilience and livelihood opportunities. We have a grant, expected grant of $8 million to be deployed between 2023 and 2029, and we've started with a $1.9 million grant already approved and in implementation. We need to bring, of course, and mobilize more resources for this to be a large-scale and long-lasting program.
So regarding the Mesoamerican Reef, our fund is also a conservation trust fund, and we're focused on conservation, preservation, and restoration of the Mesoamerican Reef, which is the largest reef in the Atlantic Ocean and the largest transboundary reef. So it spans, here you can see, over the east coast in the Caribbean Sea of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. The population of this coastal population is almost 3 million people, and quite culturally diverse with many indigenous communities. So main three economic sectors in this region are tourism, fisheries, and coastal development, and the annual value is estimated to be $4.5 billion US. And well, similarly to the other locations, the main threats for this reef, unfortunately, are the lack of wastewater treatment or sanitation, overfishing, coastal development, and climate change, of course. So 2 years ago, a bit more than 2 years ago, Marfan got involved in partnership with the Global Fund for Reefs and created this blended finance program called Mar Positive Invest. And just a few numbers here. So the commitment from the GFCR is 50 million, and we've so far received 3.7 million for our 2-year program. Next slide, please. So as Yara was saying, Mar Invest is a blended finance mechanisms to invest in market solutions that contribute positively to the reef or to the reef-dependent communities. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here because we're in the questions, it's going to cover this, but just to show you that Marfund is not in this endeavor alone. We are very lucky to count on some regional organizations and experts in finance, business, conservation, which support us in our different components, and some of them are present in the room, I think. So we have, let's say, these 3 pillars: pipeline development, which consists of grant funding for specific projects, acceleration program for early stage companies, and transactional service to support companies reach investment opportunities. And these are our partners, the Mexican Fund for Conservation of Nature with Sureste Sostenible based in Mexico, and New Ventures based in Mexico, which are our business and finance partners. Monitoring and evaluation is a very important part of the program, led by Healthy Reefs for Healthy People. Melanie here is our representative. So they sort of act as a traffic light for everything that we do. So they check on all of the projects that come into our pipeline to see if it actually has a real measurable positive impact for the reef, sort of like advocates for the cause. And finally, the financial options. This is led by another partner called Biwala, and they are sort of like the finance vehicle for the initiative. So we are developing specific financial products or mechanisms tailored for the projects that we have in the area, and looking at other financial mechanisms such as a guarantee facility and insurances. So that's in short.
Thank you so much, Amy, Natalia, and Lizzie. And I'm actually gonna get closer to you just so that you didn't miss the slides. I also want to recognize the presence of Angie, who is from Blue Alliance, our convening agent and partner in our program in the Philippines. They are doing amazing work, not only in the Philippines, but they are now actually also leading our program in Pemba Island in Tanzania. So this is a great exchange as well between, hopefully, our Latin American Caribbean programs and some of our programs in Asia and the Pacific. So thank you, Angie, for being here today. But let's move to talking about the business ecosystem and the pipeline development. You all mentioned it in your initial remarks, and I think myself and others in the room would be interested in understanding what have been the challenges in your view to mobilize capital for the blue economy. How have you been identifying the companies that can receive support from your respective institutions with the resources of the GFCR? And in doing this, could you perhaps share a very concrete example of a business that you are supporting to tackle the threats that you mentioned are affecting coral reefs in the wider Caribbean? Thanks.
Okay. So 2 years ago, well, we had to start from somewhere, so we did a mapping exercise or a scouting of what was out there in the 4 countries and what kind of projects had a positive impact or were reducing some of these threats that we could identify. So we really went out there, we talked to people. Marfund, Healthy Reefs have a great network of conservation projects or stakeholders that we know, so that was the starting point, really to try and build this pipeline. So throughout that mapping, what we realized is that there's a wide range of different types of topics. So we're talking about tourism, aquaculture, waste management, many different things. And specifically, what the trend was is that most of these enterprises are quite early stage. Some projects are even non-registered, so it's a very early ecosystem, if I can say. So that was our challenge, but it also helped us design the program in a way to grow this ecosystem. So based on this learning from what the ecosystem looks like, we defined a capacity building program which helps very early stage market initiatives but are lacking sort of the business acumen. So a support program to help them grow their idea into a business that makes sense. Companies that already exist but are very early stage, they maybe lack funding or ways to get funding, so we have developed an acceleration program to support them, and we've already finished one cohort and we're starting the next one. And we also defined a component called the transactional services, so that's for companies that are a bit more mature and can start to raise funds. So they just need a bit of help to refine their financial projections, pitch decks, you name it, and really linking them with different types of investors, specifically for the ocean economy space. So yeah, we really defined these different components based on that learning of its early stage, or immature maybe, ecosystem of these businesses. The other component that's very important to mention is the monitoring, well, the evaluation of these companies. So some of them look very good on paper, but then when you really look into the details of is there a measurable impact for the reefs or the reef community, maybe not so much. So it's very important at the early stage to do that screening in a thorough way, to make sure that you don't spend too much effort on something that might not make sense. Even if it makes business sense, it might not make reef sense.
Thanks, Cindy. Before we move to you, Natalia, I've been over there with you guys in Mexico, where I learned about the first cohort of businesses that you were supporting under the acceleration program, and I'm aware that some of those businesses have dropped from the program. So could you talk to the reasons why they have dropped? Are there lessons learned on that, on how you would change perhaps then your future cohorts for the acceleration?
So the ideal situation is that a company comes into our acceleration, it goes through the mentorship, and then they're ready to reach out to an investor, and then they score the investment for their company, and it goes all as planned as we help them define their business model, etc. But unfortunately that hasn't happened yet. But for example, one that went almost to the finish line, at the very end they've been signed a term sheet with an investor. At the end they dropped out of the deal. So unfortunately it is part of what we have to deal with. It's part of the environment. It's not only in the ocean space or the Mesoamerican Reef region. It's common in startups or early stage companies. But I think maybe the context is not helping. So the climate risks, the political risks, and so maybe that's adding on. And so what we've seen is that we need to find ways to support not just the companies, but the whole sector around it. So with capacity building, for example, to really, if we see a sector that has potential to have a positive impact, it's worth investing more than just on one company and relying all of our hopes on that one company that could maybe solve something. It's about looking at the threats and what are the ways that we can support a sector that can reduce those threats.
Thank you. I have maybe another question, but I'll give the chance first to Natalia and hear from you. And depending on what you say, I may come back to you.
Okay. So we haven't started sort of the formal scouting phase. We haven't open calls or anything similar. But for the period of time that we have been in the archipelago, it's evident that we have opportunities in the sustainable tourism sector and the fisheries sector. There's no surprise there. Within the tourism sector, especially the diving community, the divers are probably the first that we're going to look at. But I think we share, I know we share the same concerns because many of them are, yes, they're early stage. So what we're analyzing is if what we need to do is start with grants first. It's probably necessary to invest with the traditional non-recoverable grants that can allow these companies to reach the stage where they can be attractive for the funds that we will be deploying, or to bring other investors in to the archipelago. And what we wanted to start supporting businesses, especially the fisheries. What we did with them was a debt alleviation scheme. They had a debt with a company that was producing one of their boats because they lost most of their fleet to IOTA or the. June Marie, can you help me with the name of the second or the hurricane? ETA? Okay, thank you. For any further questions on Providencia, you can refer to June Marie, please. No, she's one of our very key partners. A very knowledgeable person from the archipelago and one of our advisors, and has helped us a lot to do things right. So we started with this. This was new to us. We usually don't work with banks, so we came in and closed a deal where the resources provided by Fondación were actually a debt alleviation tool. And I think we can standardize and see how this can work in other situations. But that has shown us that probably when we do have that first assessment, and after talking with knowledgeable partners or potential partners like new ventures, probably the best way to start, because of the size and the risk, is through loans, which have a safer or a larger probability of return and are more manageable for small-scale enterprises than going through the whole equity process as formal investment.
So, Christy, you want to tackle the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Nature Conservancy went through very similar approaches, so I won't repeat, but certainly the scoping of potential partners, building on some of our current partners. I think one of the challenges there, though, was that historically many of our traditional partners have been very comfortable receiving grants, but there was a lot of education and really building an understanding of blended finance and how to access some of the financial tools that were available to them. So that capacity building piece cannot be underestimated, how vital that has been. And then paired with that, the importance of having a really strong marketing communications component, because initially in budgeting for that, making sure that you have the resources to actually support those tools, because a lot of the early work has been stakeholder workshops, meetings with partners, and just explaining some of the basics of blended finance, and it was new for a lot of our partners. So I think that's one key piece of that. And one of the concrete projects that the Nature Conservancy developed similarly was to work with to develop a blue economy accelerator. Again, building some of the financial skills. Some of the businesses that would be incubated through that similarly include ecotourism, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, wastewater management and treatment, recycling, and ecosystem restoration and more. One specific example of a project that we've worked with is through Elizabeth Harbor, which is a conservation partnership where they helped to put out mooring buoys to protect critical coral reefs and seagrass beds. And then the funds, that was a partnership with Bahamas National Trust. And then the funds that were generated from the mooring can go to support the management of the marine protected area. And then there's also a supplemental additional piece of that partnership, which is improving water quality through pump out services. And so that's just one partnership example of that kind of early stage that TNC has been working on.
Great, so these first two questions, we really looked at what are the three programs doing. I think we have been able to identify some of the commonalities among the programs in terms of the process of identifying the pipeline. but maybe now let's move to maybe some more specific questions about your programs and your experiences. So Amy, I want to come back to you, and I didn't ask this question before because I actually think what Natalia and Lizzie mentioned is linked to that. You guys are developing a number of financial mechanisms to de-risk investment. And I would like you to talk a little bit about that, and particularly the guarantee fund and the parametric insurance work that you are doing. But not only that, but also talk about how are you identifying how these multiple mechanisms can work together in a single place.
Thanks for your question, Yaba. So maybe what I didn't mention before, when I was talking about the early stage companies, or sort of the maturity of these companies that we can find in the region that have a positive impact, we're talking about small ticket sizes. So it's not the most interesting for the typical investors that we reach out to, unfortunately. So it's difficult for us to raise that interest or to get them really interested in these projects, although they're great. It's just that it's not enough. So we realized that we have to be creative, and we have to create other mechanisms or structures in place to help us de-risk and attract more private funding. So one of these solutions is the creation of a guarantee fund. So it's a specific guarantee fund that will help us de-risk some of these investments, so that it will be more attractive to potential investors that are looking into some of these companies that may appear to still be risky, but then combined with a guarantee, then it will be more interesting for them. We're also looking at other mechanisms such as parametric insurance. So there was a great session this morning about parametric insurance. So it's basically based on, in our case, a climatic event, extreme weather conditions, so hurricanes, which are quite frequent in the region. So the mechanism will, if there's a hurricane strong enough, it will trigger a payout. And in our case, we're designing it for fishing communities. So if to compensate for any fishing loss days. And on top of that, thanks to the support of the GFCR, we also have access to concessional loans. So as you were mentioning just before, it's still necessary to have these better rates for loans for this region, really to kickstart the development of this ecosystem, this business ecosystem. So together, these three elements should help us really start building this ecosystem of reef positive businesses. And maybe one example we can start to talk about, we're still designing this, but we're looking at the fishing industry in Honduras, so specifically small-scale fishers. And so we have been involved in a capacity building program for these small-scale fishers to transition to sustainable practices. But we cannot just depend on capacity building to ensure that the sustainable practices will be adopted. So we need to create other mechanisms that will ensure that this is adopted. So we're looking at specific credits for the fishers, so they can maybe transition or access capital that allows them to transition to sustainable practices. However, it's still a bit of a risky space. So it may seem that these loans will still be too risky to actually implement. So we're trying to link together the parametric insurance that I just mentioned and the guarantee facility that we have just started this year. And all of these elements together, we're aiming to really transition the small-scale fishing sector in Honduras to a more sustainable one, which should reduce the pressure on the reef in that region, and hopefully fisheries can recover.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. Natalia, you in your program in the archipelago, you're also developing a number of financial mechanisms, particularly to address unsustainable tourism and overfishing. Can you dive a little bit deeper into what you are doing in that respect?
Yeah, we're calling it the Seaflower Fund, but it's sort of a collection of the dreams of everything and the success stories from other programs that Fundación has put together. So it is a fund, but it's an umbrella name for what we call combined mechanisms, where we have sinking accounts and endowment accounts. we need to ensure sustainable financial sustainability for protected areas that are in place, and that we are also supporting the creation of new ones. So as CTFs, we know that despite the fact it's not an innovative mechanism, it's the one that works best for sustainable financing, not attached to market decisions, right? So we want to slowly but surely have a significant amount of endowment resources that we can manage in order to basically address management needs, financing of management needs for the protected areas in the Seaflower UNESCO site, but also with a stream of investment in sustainable livelihoods. That is hard to accomplish. It takes time. We have the support of the GFCR for this and as seed money, and at the same time, we're having sinking accounts that will go through to businesses, local businesses, through different mechanisms. We haven't designed the guarantee fund yet, but I hope we can get there. But in the meantime, we're talking about impact-linked finance, impact investment, and probably if, as I mentioned before, we can design this new phase for us, the loan capacity, we will include also a component. So it's one name for several tools. We already have the parametric insurance as a result of a partnership with Marfund and other partners in the region. So despite the fact that the fund is going to concentrate on what I've described, the sinking accounts and the endowment accounts for loans, grants, and impact investment, I see it operating as a collective of diverse mechanisms. And hopefully suited for the different stages of development that we find in the archipelago. Because if we want to address livelihoods, we have to design things for all levels of development of enterprises. And San Andres is a big island with big hotel companies, and what we need to probably address with larger scale investments are projects that are reducing pollution from solid waste and water treatment. But that's a different scale of investment, and maybe that's more suitable for the GFCR partner Pegasus.
Thank you, Natalia. I love what both of you said, and I think your phrase was perfect, collective set of mechanisms, because they are really reinforcing each other to create the financial ecosystem that we require to truly have a blended finance approach. I want to ask another question, Natalia. You talked about time, so let's talk about time. You talked about how now you have the Seaflower Fund, and it's going to take time for you to do the next steps. But the Seaflower Fund idea has been in the making for a while, decades actually.
Decades.
What were the ingredients for it to be successful now, and why not before?
Wow, I'm gonna go for this question, but a combination of things. There's increased interest in philanthropic contributions for marine conservation. Urgency is at the peak. We just had the 2 catastrophic events. The people in the island are probably open for new alternatives, but this was in their mind for at least 20 years. You thought about it, you asked a partner to help you design it, that partner said, no, this is not feasible. But they had it in their minds and hearts. And Fondaction just came maybe at the right time, and we said, we're gonna go for it. Because if we've succeeded in other geographies with similar challenges, and it doesn't mean it's gonna happen in 2 years or 3 years, it might take longer than that. But if you don't start, then it never happens, right? So I guess it's a combination of worldwide interest, initiatives like the GFCR, the readiness of the community, and a partner that is willing to take risks.
Thank you. You were talking about hurdles through this history. Lizzie, what have been the hurdles that the Nature Conservancy has found so far in the implementation of the Bahama Reef program in the development of reef-positive businesses through blended finance?
Well, I think the first we've talked quite a bit about, which is the lack of financial literacy among our partners, and quite frankly, our staff starting out. Some of them have not done these kinds of projects before, and so I think there's a learning curve that's really important to acknowledge. I think there's also challenges accessing the financing. We've talked about that quite a bit, both debt and equity. There's, in many cases, really high cost of doing business in the Bahamas and many small island developing states. And that poses certainly a suite of challenges. I think that is why some of these, many of these programs are implementing these accelerators that are really focused on the capacity building, the entrepreneurial training, the financial literacy support, the mentorship, helping work with the businesses to actually come up with robust financial plans that are viable. And so I think that, for us, it's really not underestimating that need to build that local capacity and to have that technical expertise built into these projects, because that's really essential for their success and growth. And then also seed funding to really kick off some of these ideas that make it through the accelerators to help them jumpstart and go. I think the other part is really challenging ourselves as a conservation community. I mean, I think, one exciting project that we're early stages is working with a restoration group called Coral Vita, and then partnering with Six Senses, which is a very fancy sustainable hotel that will be built in the Bahamas, and we're looking at partnering together so that they can support the restoration of critical reefs around the hotel, and then create essentially a restoration market that they'll continue to support Coral Vita to restore and monitor the reefs. And then looking at, we're talking about stacking these different financial mechanisms. Is there a potential to stack reef insurance there if these restored reefs are providing coastal protection benefits? And so it's layering some of these additional financial mechanisms on top of that, which is really critical to making these work. But I think TNC has been piloting some of these ideas individually, right? So in Mexico with the first reef insurance program that's then leveraged and scaled to other places. But I think that what's really critical about GFCR is having the sustainable long-term funding to support the ability to stack these different financial approaches together. And I think that's been a real game changer for us at the Nature Conservancy.
Thank you, Lizzie. You talked about coral reef restoration. I want to ask you a follow-up question on that. For those of you that may or may not be familiar with the GFCR, of course, we are at the heart of what we're doing is, again, preserving and conserving the most resilient reefs that we have today, but we already know that we will have to work on coral reef restoration. So we need to start bringing in that as part of our toolbox for the future of the reefs. But coral reef restoration is, if blended finance is new and difficult, coral reef restoration is super difficult. Science is still new, being developed. Financial mechanisms around coral reef restoration are difficult, new. The policy environment around coral reef restoration is pretty absent in most places. What do you say about that? How is it that we can bring those three gaps together and move forward that tripartite agenda of coral reef restoration, science, finance, and policy?
Well, I think you've noted the gaps very clearly. I mean, I think we all know that in coral reef conservation, with increasing warming and the threats facing reefs, we can't succeed without doing restoration. And restoration is still too expensive and too difficult to scale. There are some great innovations that have happened and are happening around the world. There's a coral reef R&D accelerator, CORDAP, that I'm a part of the scientific committee on, that's really looking to push innovations in the technology so that we can scale more effectively. But again, we're gonna have to be figuring out how to deploy these in places where we often have really serious capacity constraints, technical limitations in some cases, and making sure that they can be replicated without PhDs and $1 million of investment in all of the locations. I mean, I think we really want these to scale across coral reef nations. It has to be less expensive. It has to be restoration that communities can implement and lead on. I think that's vital. And I think that in order to do that, we have to have the enabling conditions you talked about, getting the legislation and the regulation in the Bahamas and many other reef nations that make you able to do the restoration, but also have the right guardrails so that people are not doing the wrong kind of restoration. And we all know that happens a lot as well. So, and then with that, making sure that you've got the sustainable financing there to make sure that it can move forward. So I think as a community, I've been doing coral reef conservation for 20 plus years now. I have seen a lot of innovation and change, and I think we are at the cusp here with some new partnerships, some in the room, sitting in the back of the room, led by Great Barrier Reef Foundation and working closely with Australian Institute of Marine Science, who's really going to be leaning in on and has been leaning in on some of these innovative technologies in restoration. Groups like GFCR who are really elevating and pushing the support for the policy, the innovative finance, and the community engagement that's vital for making this work. So I'm hopeful. The last couple of years have challenged that hope with the temperatures in the water, but I believe we have to bring in our best effort of everybody here. They support 1/4 of all marine life in the ocean, and there are communities around the world that fish and feed their families off the reefs, and their cultural identity is tied to the reefs. And I believe that we have to do everything we can to make sure that they survive.
Thank you, Lizzie. Let's turn to you guys, our friends in the audience. So, any questions for Amy, Natalia, and Lizzie?
Thank you. I'm Carlos. I'm with Reef, and really happy to see friends and partners here. I just have a quick question for the panelists. You described the challenges of accessing credit, and most of the features are not subjects of credit, and the high informality of the sector is one of the challenges. So I'd just like to ask if you're doing something about financial inclusion, bring the sector into formality.
Let's take another question. Right in front of you.
I'm Pujan with Delta Elections Foundation. So my question would be, when you work with coral restoration or conservation, is there a set of indicators or metrics that you find most attractive to investors? Or, yeah.
We haven't started. To your question of fisheries, we haven't started with financial education because our first partner is a fairly strong grassroots organization. They have access to credit. But I believe we started working with them because they can be very strong in driving the rest of the community into adopting new practices and moving along. Is it a way to go? I think it is. But what we've decided is to start by building a strong partnership with a local fishing association that can help us move the whole sector along.
Carlos. So maybe I didn't mention that, I'm sorry for that. When I was talking about the fisheries project in Honduras, specifically the capacity building that we're developing to transition to more sustainable practices, what we also saw is that the small-scale fishing sector is not really legalized or doesn't have strong regulatory implementation. So that became part of that same capacity building. So it was both things, the sustainability practices, but also what we call bancarization to support these individuals or cooperatives, associations, regularize their activities or regulate and to become more legal. So this will eventually help them reach and access financial markets. So yes, that was part of the capacity building as well.
I can speak to your question. So we developed a guidance manual with TNC partnered with the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association and developed guidance on how to do reef restoration through that. We don't have an explicit list of kind of key criteria, but I think we have a list in that document, but I'm happy to share that. I think that's something that would be really valuable as a community to pull together, so thank you for the brilliant idea, and we will come back to you with that. But I think we have the science out there and we have the recommendations, it's just putting it into the language that would be appropriate for the investment community.
Thank you. We have, you want to say something else? No, we have time for more questions.
Hi everyone. You haven't mentioned the role of government, how governments have been an enabler or a blocker in your work. Can we talk about that?
Anyone else?
In our case, they've been an enabler, a very important one. Colombia has a decentralized system of environmental authorities, and we found a very productive partnership with Archipelagos regional environmental authority. Were even part of the design phase. And we also collaborated with the National Parks Unit. So we have been fortunate that they have been our partners all along. And in fact, one of the tools that we are analyzing, it already exists. There's a tourism fee for the island. And we hope with their support, we can establish a productive conversation with the government of the departamento, like the province. I think without them, the progress of this initiative would have been different.
I would totally, just agree with that. In the Bahamas, it's been the same. I mean, I think they've been vital partners working with Bahamas National Trust, working to develop climate resilient management plans for the MPAs. They've been partners from the beginning. I think that was one of the requirements of the GFCR project, which I think is essential in getting that buy-in early, and then having those early conversations with, and building the pipeline in parallel, in partnership with the government is really key. I think some of the challenges are just the timing of getting some of the legislation in place and the regulations that are needed, both in terms of blue carbon, but also coral restoration. But things take time, and I think the key is just having those open dialogues and the continued conversation. But we can't deliver these outcomes without close partnership with government.
Yes, definitely. And in the case of the Mesoamerican Reef, well, it's 4 different countries that we need to collaborate with. So definitely Marfan aligns its strategy with national actions. So that's one thing, but then also on specific projects. So whenever we engage into a specific sector, we always have to see who are the stakeholders. So for example, if we do a feasibility study, then we try to engage with whoever's the relevant entity, governmental entity in that sector to engage with all the relevant stakeholders. For example, we did a study on seaweed, mariculture, seaweed in Belize, and so part of that study was to engage with the local government to understand what is possible, and it turns out that the regulatory framework is still a little bit not lacking, but everything is still on the research side of things. So that's when we understood that, well, we also need to work with them to try and, because there is potential, but we want to see how to work together to move this sector forward to create a proper regulatory framework for mariculture of seaweed.
Thanks. I think I would add one other point to your question, and that is that at the GFCR level, but also I've seen across our portfolio at the programmatic level, we in the conservation community, our first interlocutor in government are the ministries of environment, but everybody is trying to see how is it that we then bring the finance partners from government, but also in the wider ecosystem in all the places where we work to work together, and that's still challenging. There's still that division between the conservation and the finance sector, and that's one of the things that the GFCR, as a global coalition, is also aiming to bridge that conversation between those 2 areas. I think I saw a hand.
Right, thank you. Yeah, my question is more on, so if we support reef positive enterprises, communities, for example, we support this cooperation of fishermen to, respect low season, what are some of the indicators that we're looking at to measure success that is reef positive? Because this fisherman community, yes, they will respect the close season, and then the nearby fishermen just come and fish and whatever. So is there something that can work in practice that we can, in reality, how does that work? Just some examples.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge we also face at the design of fishery project or small-scale fisheries project. Ideally, we would want to see impact on the reef, such as recovery of some specific fish. However, it's probably an impact that hopefully we'll see, but in the long term, right? So in the meantime, we're looking at more the social or economic indicators, or for example, the number of fishes that have adopted these sustainable practices, because the biological impact will be seen further down the line, I'm afraid. And hopefully we can reach more communities, more regions to implement these strategies?
I'll just say it's really difficult, and just be honest about that. I mean, I think one of the hardest things to do in coral reef conservation, restoration, with any of these interventions is showing how reefs are better in the face of the really significant global threats that we have. And in some cases, they're just less bad in this protected place than they are at adjacent reefs, and I think we need to be honest about that. I think, ecologically, you're looking at, several years sometimes, but in terms of seeing fisheries, changes in fisheries, when you're talking about coral reefs, it can be 5 to 10 years before you see change, even with doing all of the right things. So I think that's a key challenge, is how can we come up with indicators that are both scientifically credible, but also realistic in the challenges that we face.
Can I add something? I also wanted to provide my insight, very honest. I used to be an ecologist.
Used to be.
One
Not
time,
anymore.
one time in my life. And just working in biodiversity conservation initiatives has shown me that we are extremely optimistic, and we are usually burdened by the task of measuring impact, and it's not necessarily possible. And even when you go and work in a terrestrial environment, it's a challenge. If I go back, 30 years, we had to have baseline information, population, or demographic information of the key species we want to, and that's never available. Funding is never available for that. So I've decided that we can be very keen in measuring results, but realistic about measuring impact. Now, if we're in a marine ecosystem, how can I determine that the results or the events that I am observing and documenting are in fact the result of our intervention? Something that is interconnected, that's global, that, I don't know, I would just call for some common sense for this.
Thank you for that. I have one last question from June, but before I go to June, I actually want to piggyback on what you said, because at the GFCR we're having actually this discussion, and I'm talking to our team about this, because we have this wonderful, and I have to say, we have this really wonderful M&E framework in the GFCR. I'm gonna get to that. And we're trying to measure the positives, like the impacts on the ecological side, the social side, including the policy aspects, and then the financial side. But when it comes to the ecological side, we're here among friends, and my friend from UNEP, who is our M&E specialist, Gabriel Primstich, I tell him, Gabriel, but explain to me again exactly what you said. How can I attribute success or failure to a GFCR-funded Reef positive business or solution? And he's starting to come up with good answers. And the answer is, we actually need to focus more on how we are obeying threats, as opposed to how we are seeing an improvement in the ecosystem. Because look at all the examples that you have mentioned. There are multiple threats in multiple places, and one relatively still small GFCR-funded solution is not going to cut it. Perhaps in some programs there might be an opportunity to do that if you're really bringing everything together and there is like one key driver of degradation that you can really hone in into that, and then yes, maybe we can get to that point. But I have to agree. I mean, the truth is that we need to be more pragmatic. We need to be realistic.
And we can't stop measuring ecological condition. I mean, I feel strongly about that. Like, it's difficult. It's hard to do attribution. Is this intervention what caused it? But I also think we have to be measuring what's happening to the coral, or we're not holding ourselves to the integrity. So, I mean, I think that's important.
Great. June, last question.
Thank you. I think more than a question, it's like an invitation to work together with Marfon. Because San Andres and Providence, they are part of the system. We're right, the southern part. And our fisheries are impacted by what is the fishing fleet from Honduras, for example. And so I think it's very important to work closely. These are shared resources. So the spiny lobster, where do they come from? Are we recruiting spiny lobster in our archipelago, what's happening? So I think there are shared resources, and that's the reason why I think we need to work closely and maybe find some indicators in that case. Because really a lot of our problems are poaching from Nicaragua, República Dominicana, Belize, not Belize, but Honduras, and Jamaica. So I think if we can close this gap of who is coming where, then maybe we can. Even with the fishers, because they say, okay, we are very close and the enforcement is easy when it comes to small scale fisheries. And what about those other poaching in the northern part of the archipelago? What happened there? So I think to get their support, we need to work closely with the other projects.
Thank you so much for that, June. Maybe before we close, I would like to make an announcement and also one point around conservation trust funds and blended finance. Of course, Smart Fund and Fundación are conservation trust funds, and in the Bahamas program, we are also working with the Bahamas Protected Area Fund. So conservation trust funds are definitely coming into the blended finance agenda. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., Karen, is it? We have an event on SITS and nature, which is focused on the role of conservation trust funds in islands around blended finance and conservation and other topics, which for us islanders really all come together at the same time, and it's like a hurricane all the time, permanently. So you're all invited to that. But perhaps more for the two trust funds here, what brought you into this space? Why do you think you can make a difference in blended finance through the kind of approach that conservation trust funds bring to the table?
I think financial mechanisms are the heart and soul of CTFs. So if we need to put together a financial tool that's sustainable, conservation trust funds have the spirit to run risks, to design new mechanisms, to invest through several tools. So we were put together to facilitate the work of others. And that allows us to be in this middle portion where you have to ask what the people on the ground or in the water need, what is feasible from a financial point of view, and adjust to those conditions, mobilize funds. And also, because we were in many cases created with sustainable finance mechanisms for our own operation, we have the examples that we can mimic and adequate to new conditions.
Well, not much more to add on that, but yeah, I think we're in this position where we're bridging that gap between the private sector and the conservation projects. So really, to have a successful approach to conservation, you really need to bridge those two worlds together. And I think the conservation trust funds have a really important role to play here, because we're there with the communities, we're supporting capacity building, we're providing all of that support to make sure that all of these new financial mechanisms are adopted and successful.
Thank you. One last round. Lizzie, you talked about hope. What gives you hope from blended finance for coral reef conservation? Why do you think there's hope there?
I'm going to answer it with a twist. What gives me hope are our teams doing the work around the organ. I mean, I'm here representing our team from the Bahamas, and what they do every single day, what we all do probably in this room every single day to help keep the fires lit, keep the conversations about coral, so that we're informing the delegation, we're informing financial flows. I think that gives me hope, is the energy and the passion and the commitment. We have the call to action on the last day here about making sure that people aren't forgetting about coral reefs. I think from a pragmatic perspective, we have to have the financing to do it. I mean, I think the number one reason projects fail in conservation is lack of people, lack of capacity, and lack of dollars most often. It's not rocket science, you know, and so I think making sure that we have the actual sustainable funding that's needed is vital, and I think we cannot do it without the private sector. We can't do it without those partnerships, and you know, my hope is that there won't be a need for the Nature Conservancy. There won't be a need for the conservation organizations, because it will just be how business is done. I mean, that's where we need to be pushing to get to.
Hope. I'm usually not very optimistic, but what gives me the fuel and the energy to do this is the support of the people who look at us as an option for a solution. As a biologist, I don't think I need to go there, but as an institution, it's the support and the trust that institutions in the country and local communities are giving us.
What can I say after this? The similar views, but also maybe starting to see a shift that maybe not possible, but a shift that the private sector is also interested in conserving natural resources. And well, these spaces where we can talk to people actually from that other side, and we can actually see it, no? That they're interested and they have trust in these sort of projects. So yeah, it's nice to see.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Marfan. Thank you, Natalia, Fundación, Lizzie, TNC, for being here and being our partners. Thank you to ICRI for hosting us this afternoon for this event, and thank you so much to all of you for being here.